back, everybody, to another edition of Ekklesia on Zoom. Tonight, I wanted to continue our theme through the fall and early winter on visiting all of the tenets of Ekklesia. And tonight, I wanted to embrace the tenet of embrace all on their path to God. And we'll get into this as we go in, but I found myself studying this tenet that we wrote essentially 4 years ago before we really knew where this was going to be, where this was going to go, before many of you actually came into the picture. And so I find myself constantly re-evaluating the tenets. And obviously that's not a solo project, but I think it's a great practice, one, to look at how is it relevant, or how do we translate that tenet for ourselves as part of this community, as well as just like I said, I'm doing
put that out in the garage.
A little bit of evaluation
Okay.
of I'm going to mute everybody here real quick to evaluate the language, because sometimes our vocabularies that we use, we mean well, and then we go, wait a minute, could that be better? Could that be more inclusive? Could that resonate more or be more meaningful if we change something about how we phrase something? And so this was no different for me. So I continue to go down a little path of meditation on all of these tenets, and I'll be really curious to see, what it means to you on a number of levels as well tonight, because that will continue to inform me and inform our leadership group as well. But I wanted to open with a simple phrase: who am I? Because when we look at the tenet or theme of embrace all, seeking a path to God, it has the potential for being exclusive. What if I'm not seeking a path to God? Or what if I'm seeking a path but not to God? Do I still get embraced? So all of these things rambling around in my head. And I come to the conclusion of, who am I? Who am I to think that my understanding is the only correct way? A friend of mine, Valerie, some of you have heard me talk about Valerie Melvin. She is a regional minister friend of mine, and we were talking one day about some churches that she had conversations with about so there's another more conservative group within the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, known as the Churches of Christ, and in North Carolina they're heavily African American. And so you have a lot of culture and different theology that's a part of that we don't see as often and commonly in the Disciples of Christ that I grew up in. And as a result, she's got a lot of people that are, still on the fence, or maybe not so appreciative of the folks being ordained who are in the LGBTQ plus IA community being ordained into ministry. And she said, who am I? Who am I to tell anyone that God is not calling a person or working within a person in some way, and particularly in that case in terms of ministry? And it really, it took me back. I've heard Dad say in these Ekklesia calls and just throughout my life the same thing: who am I? And I think of that when I think of this tenet. Um, who am I to potentially prevent or deter or confuse another person on their path? Who am I thinking that my way is the right way? Who am I? I am figuring this out for myself too. I am here to walk alongside you wherever you are on your path. I am to love you even if your path is different from my own. So those are some of my thoughts this week as I've been pondering this theme of embrace all on their path to God. And I want to thank Rick for helping pull some music for tonight. This is a song that takes me back to my high school days. And I had completely forgotten about it, but I did a little study on the words, and I wanted to share with you before I play this first video. The vocative case of the Greek word Kyrios or Kurios is Lord, and that is Kyrie. The word Kyrie or Kyrie, if you pronounce it in the Greek, is used in the Septuagint, which is the earliest Greek translation of the Old Testament. It's used to translate the Hebrew word Yahweh.
Oh, I know that.
In the New Testament, Kyrie is the title given to Christ, as in Philippians. And as part of the Greek formula, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. The word is used as a preliminary petition before a formal prayer. And I think in terms of people on our path and figuring out what it is about this divine mystery that we're trying to understand or find a way to embrace, and embracing each other on this journey, that we each have our own way of calling out to this divine mystery. Sometimes it's just to simply be, to be present and aware and just living in this moment. And sometimes it is an actual petition to God. And so I thought this would be the appropriate way to kind of usher in tonight's conversation, is through this petition of Lord, have mercy. All right, well, I guess the first question, I don't have slides tonight, but I do have a lot of questions, and I want to say thank you to Ranu too for making this tonight also have yet another dimension of perspective to it. I invited Ranu, as I said in the email, because I thought, who should I partner with on this one who really has stories of being embraced on their path to God? Because her path has been kind of different. I mean, not just because she's Hindu, but because she's an immigrant. She's a child of immigrants. She's learning about faith practices through her own daughter's experiences in Dallas. And so she's really had kind of lots of different circles that she's been in. And I thought, making sure that she was with us tonight to be in this conversation, I thought would be very powerful. So thank you, Ranu, for agreeing to do that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So my first question for us to think about, to share about, is what are some different ways that we address the divine mystery? What are different ways that we address the divine mystery?
Alcohol usually works pretty well.
Say that again.
Alcohol usually works pretty well.
Alcohol.
Probably not the answer you're looking for, but
Mhm.
I was going to say silence is one way.
Mm. Silence.
like
I
this.
would say presence, and that's okay. Silence is okay. Even in this, we're thinking,
Yeah.
Presence and silence.
Being alone sometimes
Elaine says being alone.
brings listening.
Dad says listening. Because we
Since
tend to
it's-
have names for God. Go ahead, Ron.
No, I was saying, since it's a mystery, sometimes it's just reading, trying to figure it out, going through the scriptures or the books or some guidance.
Mhm. Mhm.
A lot of times it's just going to church and hearing what the preacher has to say
Mhm.
or reading the Bible.
Mhm. I think embrace all seeking a path to God. What do we address as that? Embrace all seeking a path to this
So
space that is whole and good and life-giving.
can we talk about the connection between path and faith? I think words wise, P and F are related, and I think that path and faith are related. And so
Mhm.
I've had faith in a lot of things besides God on my developmental journey, on my human journey. And so maybe faith might be a way to talk about the path that doesn't necessitate an outside deity or an inside deity. So,
Did somebody start to say something?
Yeah, I'd saying something.
Hang on, Daddy. We're gonna have to get you closer. Can you sit up and speak to that?
I grew up in the Baptist church, and it was a congregation that had been started by my father's father, and I went to it because he was preacher for a time, and after he was gone and they called the first minister, um, after the church service, a family came forward to join the church, and the congregation voted on whether they could join the church or not. And they turned them down. They would not let them come into the church. Well, that was the end of the Baptist church for me, because I thought that was a violation of people in their path to God. And I began a search that led me to the Brethren Church, which was wonderful. And I was in the Brethren Church for several years until baseball season came and I wanted to play baseball. So in order to be a member of the church, you had to attend church to play on the baseball team. So I played on the baseball team. And I went to the Christian church. And I found that the Christian church is not judgmental. It is loving and serving. And so that was where I was when I went off to TCU, Texas Christian University. And I took as my minor philosophy. And the professor of that class turned my world upside down. He would sit on my desk and he'd look at me and he'd say, "King, do you believe in God?" And I said, "Yes, I believe in God." He said, "Well, I believe in the great green oompa on the science building. And you prove to me there's a God, and I'll prove to you there's a great green oompa on the science building." Well, I couldn't prove the existence of God. And so I went into free fall spiritually. I didn't have any answers.
Yeah.
And so one day I went to the minister of the University Christian Church with an appointment. And I told him about my experience in the philosophy class. And I said, he tore me all to pieces. I don't know what to believe anymore. And the minister said, "Like what?" And I said, "Well, I believe that God made everything and everyone, and that we're his." And he said, "What's wrong with that?" And I said, "Well, the professor said the great green oompa created everything and everyone, and he's in charge." Well, I don't have any answers for that. I can't argue with it, but it's not what I have always believed. You see, growing up as a child in the church, I believed that there was a God and that he loved me and that he took care of me. And there I was, calling all of that into question. I never left the church, and through the years, my confidence in God has grown. And tonight, I believe that God loves us, he takes care of us, and he wants the best for us. And so he sent his only begotten Son to die for us. And that dying for us troubled me for a long time. Until someone said, "Well, somebody has to pay the debts for our sins." And I said, "Why?" "Because it's an offense to God," he said. And Jesus paid the price. It was God's will that he do so. And so we're free from our bondage to sin. We're free to love God and love our neighbors and to be Christ's servant to help other people along the way. It's been a long path for me and not painless.
Roy, I have a question for you. What I'm wondering is that just because your philosophy professor, believed in essentially the flying spaghetti monster, that's his belief. That isn't yours. And nothing that he would have said or done should have shaken, I can talk, should have shaken your faith, because each one of us has got our own beliefs. And I find it just practically offensive that someone goes out of the way to tell you that, prove to me there's a God and not, this thing over here. All right, prove to me there's not. You can't prove either one. So as long as each of us has our own belief, that is owned and sacrosanct to us. Nobody can take that away. And sometimes it kind of frustраtes me when people try and do that. And I'm sorry that it happened to you at such a young age.
Thank you.
Well, I want to speak up for I want to say something. I was along with this chief at that time. Am I there?
Yep.
Well, I don't have much to say at all, except that I want you to know that the university fired that professor. So I just need to know that everybody knows that the university didn't keep him on staff.
Yeah, Roy, I'm real sorry that happened to you too, because I got put into free fall in university as well.
Mhm.
And it wasn't, and it was all just because of my classes. It wasn't because of anything that my professor said to me. I think that a lot of students are in a very vulnerable place when they come to university in terms of the things that they're going to learn, and especially in classes like philosophy and religion. I remember my roommate came back from a philosophy class one night, and she was totally upset, really freaked out, because they discussed the fact that when you went to sleep, when you closed your eyes, did everything else disappear? She was truly, really freaked out by that. And I had a hard enough time in my religious studies classes just reconciling the stuff that I was hearing when I was learned, without a professor coming to me and saying, prove to me that God exists. So that's a terrible thing to do to a student. It's a question that I might take a stab at now if somebody asked me. But I would say, just as you said there, I can't prove that he exists, and you can't prove that he doesn't exist. So, let's just call it a day.
It's a misuse of the scientific method.
It absolutely is. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. If someone comes to you and says to me, prove that God exists, the onus is on them actually prove that he doesn't exist. Your teacher was terrible, and I'm glad he was fired.
Your teacher was terrible. She's glad he was fired.
I'm hoping he's living in a much warmer place now.
Oh, really? Well, now, you got to embrace him.
I did,
Path was very different from a lot of ours.
and warmer.
We don't know what climate the great green Oompa prefers.
That's right.
See, yep, it's exactly.
Nice. Well, that I want to jump ahead. I have a series of questions. We don't have to go in any particular order, but that brings me to a time of share a time when your own path to God changed. And Ranu, I don't know if this is a good point for you or not, but feel free to jump in. Share a time when your path to God or your name for God changed in some way. I'll go first. My path never changed. My sister's laughing at me.
I thought the same thing.
I'm like, well, why not? You know, what's wrong with me? I feel that my path has not changed, but that the folks I'm meeting along the path and taking with me on my path have changed. I feel that the experience itself of walking the path has changed. That's what's significantly different for me. Walking the path itself has, in these more recent years, have become a lot more interesting. I wouldn't say challenging. I mean, there've been some times where it's been challenging, because it's something that the group was heading, the leadership team was heading in one direction, and I wasn't sure that was where my own faith felt comfortable going, and I had to learn and grow with that a little bit and reconcile. Why not? So I think for me, how I've walked the path is changed for the better, and that's partly due in part to knowing all of you and you being so generous in sharing your own stories from the path. Anyone else want to go? Ranu?
I think it's quite okay. I'm in my journey, and my journey is giving to this opinion is that one's path, who lays it out? So when you're born, do you have that wisdom yet to know exactly what your path is going to be? Or it's really based upon increasing continuous awareness and your experience, your human experience, at least at that time. And moment to moment, when you're living in the present moment, you're learning something, and that may put the next stone forward on your path. Now, how we are guided on these paths may come from our predecessors, our parents, our communities, and they or that may be where the path is laid for us, kind of in an automatic way. I think growing up in a situation where you're growing under immigrant, let's say, parents, they're just trying to grasp the current environment and trying to retain really hard, especially in those days. I think there was something about the balance between assimilation into a new culture and then maintaining and sustaining what was known to them. And again, very much a fingerprint. Every family is different, right? You have some families that may have a spiritual path, and then there are others that may not. They're there to do whatever it is that's across this globe. And so I feel that the path is still changing in the sense that there's always enhancements to what comes in front of me on the path, and I recognize the guidance on that path doesn't necessarily come from me per se, but more from a higher power that is giving me light and guidance to move along the path. Now, hopefully I'm learning every time I take that step on that path. And there is some sort of forward movement. It's like, oh, I learned that. And now I can utilize that knowledge and enhance the next steps that I take to move forward. And so I think it's very dynamic. And each of us are on a continuous path in this lifetime. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong, but the tenets of, how to be a contributing force in nature, right? That does not have to be determined by predestination. And speaking of paths, there's unfortunately those of us who are really caught up in this was my destiny, or it's already laid out for me. I think we had this conversation earlier in some weeks back about predestined mindset. That's difficult, right? Because then you can just say give up and I'll just go on the ride. But you're not. Are you rolling in the cart, along that path? But when another way of looking at it is that for those who may believe in the higher power, like God, you can say, well, God is carrying me along that path. But you're supposed to be an observer. Are you usually just the baby that never grows up? I mean, the whole point is that you're being shown something and learning and growing and moving forward. And the last thing I'll say on that, in terms of share a time when my own path changed, I think it's a continuous process of revelations each and every step that I take.
Thank you. And I loved your beautiful visual. You said in the very beginning, you said something about the stones along the path. And it just, our path is paved by a number of things. It's paved by our choices, it's paved by spirit, perhaps. It's paved by those along the journey with us. And I love the visual of this stone of people that we say, I want these people on my path with me. And knowing that these people that I have come to trust can lay these stones out ahead of me for me to walk upon, instead of it just always being the same, the path being the same as it always was back there. Moving forward is this new stone and another stone and another stone to step on. I love that visual.
So you just mentioned the stones are used in the wedding ceremony in Hindu ceremony, where you take 7 steps and you are stepping on those stones, 7 stones, and it's to advance you to your new life. And those virtues are repeated there. So these paths, as you can see, are very much part of ancient understandings of walking along, moving along. What does it mean? Taking the step. And these are beautiful analogies.
Thank you for sharing that. That's quite a neat part of a wedding ceremony. That's right. The Celtics may have something to that, Elaine said.
For the Hebrews, that number 7 is the number for a vow, right?
Allow.
A vow.
Oh, a vow.
So the word for vow is related to the number 7. So I wonder if there's some connection there.
Well, they also keep the stones around so that if it doesn't work out, they can stone you with them.
Well, there's always connection. So, yeah. I think while we're talking about some of, the actual path and the stones, that we can step on, and I know, Michelle, you'll guide the conversation, but it'll be interesting once we get to the barriers part, What about the barriers maybe in the path?
That's right. Well, let's talk about the barriers. What are barriers to embracing a new path? Let's start there.
Well, can I back up one thing?
Okay, sure, Rick.
Sometimes we don't know the path until we look back. Yeah.
Mhm.
You can't see the path going ahead. But when you're somewhere, you can look back and see it. It doesn't necessarily tell you where you're going, but it's told you what you've done to get here. And I think that we can't always see the path. I mean, it's kind of an analogy. There was one plan when I was growing up, I was going to go. Along that path, excuse me, I was very, well, I say cynical, but I'm still that. But I was quite agnostic, and really had no use either way for religion or God. Like, if you're into it, that's fine. That's great. I don't care. Then, this is again looking back, my path changed, that I ended up down here among all of you. And that caused me to have a change and review the path. I still have no idea what direction the path is going, but I know where it's been and I know where it's brought me. And sometimes that's just enough to take another step. Okay, now.
Thank you, Rick. So what are some barriers to embracing a new path?
Here.
The fear of change.
Dorothy says the fear of change.
That's what I was about to say. Change makes it so much harder.
Our love for habit.
We're so comfortable with the way things are.
Yeah.
To do something different, it's like, I don't know if I like this.
Full acceptance.
And
Elaine
then you get to the point that you're midway between them. So if you pick either one, you're damned either way. Can't go back, can't go forward. So you say beans out and just do something else completely different.
And the unknown always has a bit of fear with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What'd you say, Elaine?
I said one of the fears would be cultural acceptance or non-acceptance.
Cultural acceptance or non-acceptance. One of the fears is acceptance by a culture or a group, a community.
But that's where faith comes in.
Is that like fear of abandonment? Or not?
Or
quite?
ousting.
Non-acceptance.
I would say fear of ousting, the fear
Like
of
being
losing the
called
community
a
that you have.
heretic.
Right.
Isn't that where faith comes in? Because if you have faith in the path that you're on or where you're going, you don't give a wet slap what anyone else has to say, because this is your path.
Well, but I think history has shown there's reason to be fearful at times.
Sure.
Because communities of people that are like-minded in a certain direction will say that's unacceptable, that's heretical. Maybe you're just a witch, Rick.
Well,
You blew the first letter.
Crowds are fickle.
Crowds are fickle.
You know, if things are going easy, maybe it's fashionable to support the leader, but when things get difficult, or maybe not leader, but change agent, and then when things get difficult, maybe the first reflex is to go back to the way things were. Right, the Forbidden City in China, right? There was an emperor who wanted to do things different, and And then there were floods and different things that happened. And so they took that as a sign to abandon the new capital city, and they went back to the old one.
So I guess the question I have then is, can one's faith in whatever that, however that faith can that be enough for embracing a different way or change or supporting someone else who is on a different path? If you know that you're potentially walking into pushback, but you really believe that that is the right thing to do, it's just like standing up for some social justice issue in some ways. I mean, you could liken it to that. Does your faith help you say, no, I am going to rest in my faith in God, Jesus, whoever, that your faith in the supreme being, divine mystery, that all will be well and all will work out? Is that enough to help you embrace a different way or embrace someone on a path that it may be different than yours?
But I'm so great.
It's so, oh, sorry. It's so funny because this strikes home for me this week so strongly. And sometimes it has to be. Sometimes you have to just have faith that it's going to work out. I know that there are times that I'm sometimes too optimistic for people because they're like, seriously, you don't need to be devil's advocate. You don't need to be like, but I've always been of the mindset, I hope for the best. I pray for the best. I prepare for the worst, just so that I'm prepared if it doesn't go. But I always try to have the faith of that it's going to be okay. And if it isn't okay at the time, I'm usually good about going back and being like, you know what? But it still worked out. It might have been rough for that little bit, but in the end, it still worked out. It was that stepping stone was a little wobbly. And I was unsure, but I still took the step forward and went, we just keep going. You go every day, and that's all you can do. And so, I mean, for me, that's how I picture it. Sometimes you have to have the faith that tomorrow will be better, and that even though the things that you're going through now hurt a lot, it will work out.
Yeah. This is a great, this is pulling together a lot of what was just said and what we're saying now in terms of the path itself. I feel that maybe we think the path is actually very linear and kind of a two-dimensional thing in front of us. If you kind of consider the path of being something very 3D and always expanding, because your past experience, as Rick had mentioned, maybe there were some not so great things that happened, but once you have experienced it, it may open your eyes to something that may have enlightened you, that it could have been done differently, or I learned something, or because of this person, they taught me something, even though it was not a good deal. It was a really painful time. So what was the purpose of that barrier, boulder? You fell down while you were kind of go on that path. And did you pick yourself back up? Who was able to help you during that time? Was it your faith? Was it not? Was it even questioning your faith and striving and seeking and just saying, no, I'm going to pull myself. I need to find the answer. What I'm trying to summarize in this case, I think, is that once you're awakened, can you really go back to sleep? Once you're awakened, and you know that whatever that is, you want to call it faith, you want to call it mission, you want to call it duty, you want to call it whatever it is, then the light, not only is that awakened aspect of yourself shining a light on the path forward, you can look back and say, I see you and I love you, and all the things that happened. And yet, with that knowledge, I can now see myself on this expanded, beautiful path. And it won't always be great, because there's going to be a storm. There's going to be a little, pothole. But then, because we're awakened, we may be able to better navigate our way through. And we use our past experience to say, oh, I went through that pothole. Something looked like that before. I think I know how to navigate my way around it. With that knowledge and your expansive knowledge, doesn't one's faith maybe increase, get stronger? So experience is acquired along the path. Otherwise, we're just walking. I'm not sure what the purpose is, just action, exercise, So I think that was well said by everyone. And I hope that kind of tied together a little of what we already talked about.
I think there's something, I would say that we should never forget, but we will. There are two things that define us, and that's our sense of honor and faith. No one can take that away from you, and no one can change that. Those two things are your refuge. That's what you go into to ride the storm out. Don't let anyone tell you what your faith is, isn't, should or shouldn't be, nor let someone dishonor you, because those are who you are. And it's those two things that will determine your path, for better or worse. And again, you'll see that going back, but I think you've got to stay loyal to yourself and your path, or not.
And oftentimes it's not the other person that's trying to take you off of your path, it's often yourself. So this is what I am seeing, which has been the weirdest part of this journey live, these last several months with my mother, the person that taught me all the tenets of my own early path of spirituality by example, the stories which you may have heard in the past. This is the same person within her own doing and her own mind has shut her eyes, so to speak. She's awakened, but then she is not wanting to see because of fear, maybe some doubt, fear and doubt. These are huge things that kind of do interesting things to the mind of a human person. So to try to grasp those pieces of her and her light and just kind of like uncover a little bit, because it's a little dusty, something along her path has just kind of thrown a bit of mud, and she's trying to get those windshield wipers and find her way again. But this is where she needs a little help. However, she is stating she would often say yes to somebody else that did this to me, and then she'll turn and she'll say, no, I did this to myself. So she's on a very difficult spot in her path right now. So it wasn't somebody else. She thought initially it was somebody else, but I think she's starting to realize some of it was her own mind or her own concepts of things where fear got in the way. And her own faith is being shaken.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Nope.
I thought it was interesting how you had said that your mom is very much like she's closing her eyes to things that she wouldn't have closed her eyes to before. And as we were talking earlier, when we're talking about barriers, that was one of the things that I was going to say I mean, we talked about all the emotions and fear and all that, but sometimes we are our own barrier, and we will stop ourselves from believing that this is the path I'm supposed to be doing, or these are the questions I'm supposed to be asking. This is where I'm supposed to be with this, because sometimes that's bliss. If I don't deal with it now, if I am ignorant to what's going on, then I'm not going to be upset and I'm not going to be hurting. I'm going to be in this world that allows me to be in this sameness without that change. And then I am my own barrier until something shakes that. Go ahead. Sorry, Deb.
No, thank you, Rachel. For me, the idea of a path is also a dance. And it can have partners or not, slow or fast. But there have been times when I haven't had the confidence or the hope to dance. I just wanted to close things down, whether it was shame or whether it was a defeat of some sort, or not feeling supported, all those different things. I mean, it's resistance that's coming from me, right, that causes that. But it goes back to those things we were talking about before: fear and habit, and and knowing the old dance steps, right?
Oh, you just touched on something, Jeff, that's really important. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead and continue.
No, you're good. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
This statement, you think about this now with all the ways that we humans and the universe moves along, is always with rhythm. There is something rhythmical at all times. Look at the music that we listen to. Every Ekklesia, every Zoom that we've done has a piece of music that we find rhythm with. So this dance, this rhythm, when we're stepping, when we're walking, don't we have a bit of a rhythm? It might be slow, it might be fast, might be like stopping and then we resume. So maybe if we get into a spot where the rhythm is just totally off, we're just off. But that awareness, because we've been equipped with the sensory system to be aware, it's like, oh, I guess I'm just a little off my rhythm, that's not a bad thing. You're just being aware of it, right? But you have to use your awareness. Otherwise, it's almost like a bit of a waste in a way. Like, okay, you've been blessed with awareness, and you're maybe trying to, just within your journey, understand that you're expanding your awareness. But if you're not going to use that awareness, and you're like, I'm a little off rhythm, or maybe my friend's a little off rhythm, or I can see that they're hurting and they're off rhythm. How can I help myself? How can I make a move to recalibrate? Maybe I just have to step back for a second, put on a different CD, if anyone listens to the CD, anyone, what I'm saying? Like that was a neat way of how we move along the path. To Michelle's point earlier, it's not just the path, it's the how parts as well. She said that very early in her statement. And so, but I think if we keep punishing people for being a little out of rhythm, that's not very helpful, whether it's ourselves or others. But maybe if you put on a tune for them, they'll be like, oh yeah, this really resonates to me. I'm going to join you, just like what Michelle had mentioned. People will join you along that path, or maybe you join them.
Ranu, you did something, well, actually everyone has, but it's something that is very important considering our path. Much like the universe itself, it's ever expanding. The scope of our path and what we're doing, there's a little more to it every day. And again, just as in nature, things kind of go to crap when they start compressing and getting smaller. But as long as you follow this is me being metaphysical here, as long as you allow your future and your path to expand the way it wants to and in the time it wants to, it'll work. Also, helping other people expand their path or expanding with them, bringing them along, as it were. So, yeah, I think when you were talking about expansion, something that we really don't talk that much about, and maybe we should at some point.
And we're just talking about the snapshot of our human life, meaning birth to death. And I think for those who are very learned, like Roy, like Dorothy, the conversation when you leave this body is still a big continuation of this path. You're just no longer having to be contained by that body. So we keep forgetting maybe that we are a soul, or we're an energetic aspect of the source, of the universe's source. If you want to call it God, you can. Just temporarily in this container. Container goes bye-bye, and you're free. You are freed to join a different level of the blissful next part of one's path.
You expand to the next level.
You expand to the next level.
Of course, I come back in 3 days, but that's another story.
Yeah. And there may be purpose for that. There are those near-death experiences are beautiful to read and learn about. And I think one day maybe we can do something where we get some folks who at Ekklesia just to talk about near-death experiences, because it's a very or even past lives, it's just it's like, oh, okay. We keep thinking that this is it, and it's just one part of our journey along the path of
I've been here many times.
Well, that's why the people say that through meditation they can go there, right? That's a wonderful, that's pretty groovy, if you can go there and then come back, and then that's what. So if you're speaking, how talking about my Hindu faith, and I'm sure other spiritual leaders understand this in very ancient ways and times. They understood, like with this opportunity to go into sort of like a meditative state, they get these answers, and they recognize that, oh, there's something bigger than me, and they come back and they have these experiences like, oh, I just went to bliss and back, and there's something much bigger than my current life at this moment. But that's hard, right? Some people, why would you believe if you haven't experienced it? But for those who've experienced it, they'll tell you, right? Can tell you that you can't, and they can't deny their experience, and they're willing to share it. Something to listen to.
Well, with the time we have left, I'd like to do something. I want to turn the focus a little bit to how we help others, how we embrace our role as a partner, walking alongside. But I want to try an exercise first and see where this takes us. I'm going to say this tenet of Ekklesia, but I'm going to speak it very slowly. And I'm going to pause, and I may say it 3 times. I want you to identify which part of this sticks out to you, and think about why that jumped out at you, why that word in particular resonates with you. Why does it resonate with you? And then what word jumps out that you feel is an important part of this tenet in terms of how it builds community, supports other people on that path. All right, so I'm gonna read it, but I'm gonna read it very slowly. embrace all, seeking a path to God. Embrace all, seeking a path to God. Embrace all, seeking a path to God. All right, who's going to go first?
Ready.
All right,
So-
Jeff.
I like the first three words. Because they're each one opens. And then
Each
and
one
then-
opens. Can you dive into that a little bit?
so embrace, right, is intimate, it's close, and then we get all, right? So that that becomes a universal hug, so to speak. And then we get seeking. And so now not only are we hugging, we're expanding our horizon while we're hugging. And then a path sort of goes in the opposite direction. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but it does seem like it. We go from an expanding universe to a specifying universe. Does that make sense? So I don't know if I don't know if so the first word that comes to mind as an alternative would be experience. But I don't know if that necessarily is Ekklesia as much as me. So and with that I will stop unless anybody has a clarifying question.
Anyone, what word or phrase jumped out at you, resonates with you? Rachel?
For me it was interesting because embrace all. And something I try to make sure I do. But then it was seeking. And I don't normally like where we were talking about earlier about how people can help us on our path. And that I think sometimes I help even when they're not seeking it. And so that was something that stuck out to me because I try to embrace all. I try to to be there and say, hey, these are my experiences. I'm letting you know what I'm seeing here. And I think that there's a reason why I'm here to talk to you about that. But it's the seeking part that's really important. Because if they're not seeking it, they're not going to pay attention for their path. Doesn't mean I don't embrace them, but it's definitely something that I look at and went, that stuck out for me.
Rick?
I have two words and they're out of order, which, not sure what else is new. I look at the two words of seek and embrace as opposed to, embracing and seeking. It's just seek and embrace what you find and seek and embrace all. So, so then that's what I took out of this. And I'm talking far too much, so I'm just going to go away.
No, you're not. Thank you for sharing. Rachel? No.
I was just saying he's not talking far too much, but I actually really I like the switching of the words.
Robert?
Sometimes, well, not sometimes, but everyone has an inherited faith or belief or set of circumstances. And when you're young, you believe it. So it just makes sense to realize that not everyone has the same focus as we do, or we may have. And when we have learned about other religions or other faiths, you know, especially me when I was talking with Sarmita across the hall when I was teaching, she's from India and is a Muslim. And we have had some very interesting conversations about what we believe and how we believe. And we have both come to the conclusion that we pray to the same God. It's just a difference in the inherited faiths.
So, Robert, which of the words in this tenet resonated most with you?
Embrace all, because that is kind of what we get from the Bible about what Jesus said, you know, love all, or, you know, his focus was to love others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sarah, thoughts? Which word jumped out for you?
I think it's embrace all for me as well, but I think you need something else as well. But I don't know what it is.
It needs a embrace all in a context.
Yeah,
or
there needs to be another qualifier beyond that, but something that keeps it inclusive as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It doesn't have to have embrace all seeking a path to God. It could just be embrace all.
So we can acknowledge that we are seeking a path to God or to spirituality or to understanding or to conversation, right? But someone who wants to participate or wants to observe doesn't necessarily have to be in a seeking mode.
Right. Sometimes they need to just be loved and be embraced and just be allowed to be, and to be perhaps in community, even if they're not at a place where they're actively seeking.
Sometimes the best way to say something is to say what it's not, right? And maybe we could say something to the effect of, Ekklesia does not discriminate, disqualify, or minimize based on any of the typical faith things, right? I don't know how to say that.
It's easy to get very wordy when we start doing stuff like this.
Yeah, you know, and maybe the flip side of that is we value each other's story and experience, you know.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it is. It's something like that needs to come after that. If I was looking at, if that was the description of the group, if that was the title of the group and there was nothing else, I would think, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm embrace all. I don't know if I'm welcome here. What is that?
Right.
I suppose it depends on the embrace.
I think the word seeking is my hang up with the tenet, the way it's written.
Again, yeah, seeking what? Yeah.
Well, and
Recognize.
seeking what? But seeking, because I think like we have discovered, we all have, we're at different places in this journey, right? And at some point, sometimes we're not actively seeking, and that sometimes that's not good, but sometimes that's healthy. Sometimes it's cathartic to take a break, right? And I think that allows us to have some space to get away from maybe something that wasn't helping us. Perhaps we needed a break. And so the idea of embrace all, seeking a path, to me, I think that word, while it also harkens to my Christian faith of, seek and you'll find. But sometimes we need to heal before we can continue the journey of seeking. I think it just depends on where we're. So I think that was the word that I like all the words in this. And I think we can always find a positive attribution of each word as well as something that's a challenge. But anybody else have a word or phrase that from that jumped out at you, resonates for you?
Pretty much what everybody else agreed on.
The room is saying everything you guys said, they agree with you. Greg, which word jumps out for you? Good to see you tonight.
Sorry, I missed part of the conversation. I had dogs coming in and going, so.
Well, I read embrace all, seeking a path to God, the tenet, one of the tenets of Ekklesia. And we're just kind of sharing which of those words jumps out at you. Embrace all.
Probably just embrace,
Mhm.
just meaning it, yeah, inclusiveness.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because we're a circle of people that these tenets, all of them, are meaningful to us. So it's kind of hard to do this totally from the perspective of those of us who live this and have experienced the Ekklesia, as opposed to those who have yet to experience it. What, like Sarah's saying, if I were kind of outside in the term, if it was only embrace all, I don't know what that means to me. It's looking at all of the tenets in their fullness as well from a visitor's perspective as to how meaningful that is. So just some things to think about, to go with, and I know we're out of time. If you have other thoughts later as to this one in particular, or how Ekklesia can be better partners for each other and others, as we embrace them along the way, please share them with the group.